Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh Dippold, integrating presence, and today I have Linn Rivers with me. Linn, what's going on today?
Not a whole lot. Just happy to be here with you.
Well, right on. As people may or may not know, what I often do here is if I haven't met a guest beforehand and talk too much, then I throw it back and say, who is Linn Rivers and what kind of work is involved? What do you do?
That's a great question. So, I am a functional health and wellness expert, and I help people all over the world heal through chronic health conditions and mental health disorders by understanding the root cause of all illness and really getting to the basis of what's happening in their body and what they can do to actually step into a completely new trajectory with their health and general lifestyle in general. And so I got into that because of my own healing journey. I had, I started off very early on in life with pneumonia when I was 1 and 3, asthma my entire childhood. It went into hormonal issues, chronic depression. I was suicidally depressed in my teens and 20s. And then it turned into a lot of other gut dysbiosis, which then turned into 2 near-death experiences and just a really big journey of healing. And my family, the majority of them died actually before I was 15 years old, also from many different kinds of different illnesses. And so it was just kind of my journey to learn as much as I possibly could about the human body and what it means to genuinely heal.
The root of all illness, you mentioned, and now that is intriguing. And I want to just dive right into that because the root is the most important part because, as we know, the metaphor of a tree, if you cut something off, some trees will come back, but if you uproot something. So to me, that's fascinating. All the other things are very important as well, but let's dive in. What is that? And how did you discover that?
So functional medicine, again, it's finding the root cause of illness. And when we talk about the root cause, when you go to the doctor and you're diagnosed with something, they give you millions of different diagnoses, right? Those diagnoses are simply a symptom of an imbalance in your body. And those imbalances have a root cause of why they are happening. And we can bring it back to lifestyle as the big picture. But when we talk about lifestyle, that means everything. What we eat, how we eat, who we're eating with, when we're eating, how we're sleeping, our activity levels. All of these things go into what's going to happen to your body and if your body's going to have what it actually needs in order for it to heal itself, right? So I always like to remind people that diagnoses in general are just a symptom, and unfortunately a lot of the medical cultures, they like to mask the symptoms, and that is not helping people heal. That is just helping mask the symptoms, which is unfortunately your body's way of saying, hey, something's off and I need help, right? So we want to dig for that and understand where the illness is coming from in the first place. Is it because of gut dysbiosis? Is it because of a virus? Is there something going on in your body that's not allowing your system to actually do the healing that it's naturally meant to do? Our bodies are its own healing mechanism. And when it has the nutrients that it needs and it has the movement that it needs, it can actually function and do so many things for us, including our mental health and awareness. If our vagus nerve is working properly and our gut is doing what it's supposed to do, we have millions of nerves that literally come from our gut to our brain. And so everything that's happening in your gut is going to affect your mental health more than what we ever thought possible, right? I mean, we're looking at 95% of what happens in our brain actually stemming from the gut. So it's a really big deal. And that's what I do. I help people uncover all of these different avenues.
Well, beautiful. The gut brain, as they say, it's huge right now, for sure. And I mean, some of these psychiatric medications and things, they work on the serotonin levels and layers and different chemical in the gut, from what I understand. Now, the lifestyle, you mentioned lifestyle choices and being a thing. How do you work with people with lifestyle choices? I mean, do people come and, I mean, I'm sure this is kind of a delicate issue with some people. They might, I mean, how do you point out someone's lifestyle is not healthy for them? I mean, a lot of people obviously know this. They know they shouldn't be living the way they're living. And yet, you know, without invalidation or they're doing something wrong, there's something fundamentally flawed with them. I mean, is there a carrot and a stick approach? How do you work with people to change lifestyles?
So I am a more straightforward practitioner, and I make it known that if you're going to work with me, we are going to uncover everything. I'm not a gentle person when it comes to it, because I think that leads to people continuing to make excuses, and it's kind of that mentality, the enabling mentality. If you keep enabling them and you just like, you know, pacify it, they're not going to get the picture. And what I tell someone might not stick right away, but it's going to be in the back of their head from here on out. And at one point, they're going to have to stop and acknowledge what I've said to them. Right. And again, when we talk about lifestyle, it's one of those things where it's everything. It's not just one thing. And so it really takes a person to reach a point in their life where they recognize, I'm not happy and I can't keep living this way. And so they do look for someone like me who works in all the areas, right? Mind, body, spirit. And so people know that they're coming to me to get the big picture. It's not just like this one process. I look at everything in their life. And I also think that it really comes down to one of the biggest questions that I ask my clients is, if you see yourself down the road 5 years from now and you're in the same position that you are today, or potentially worse because things typically take that turn, are you going to be happy? And if they say no, and they're willing to take the steps today, those are the people that I work with, right? The ones that are ready and they're ready to invest in themselves. They don't bat an eye at how much it costs. They know that they have to make the change. That is how I weed people out. I don't work with just everyone. I do have a high price tag because I want the people who are actually ready to make the changes and are going to invest in it. So it comes down to, I give straightforward advice. I let people know exactly what they need to do in order to get better. I give them all the tools that they need, right? But just as that good saying says, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. That's one of the biggest truths in life. You can give people all the knowledge all day long, but it's up to them to actually take it and to do the healing themselves. I'm just a provider of the information. They're the ones that are ultimately taking their healing into their own hands.
Well, right on. Well, one of the reasons I brought you here today is to talk about trauma. But before we get there, I was just curious about how hands-on are you with clients? Are you checking up on them daily, weekly? Is it mainly just a funnel them into resources and let them go on their own? How does that work for anyone curious?
Yeah, so it's actually a month-long program. That's the minimal that you can walk into. And it's four sessions. So the first session is typically like an hour and a half long because that's where we're diving into everything. And then we have 4 calls, 3 other calls throughout the rest of the month. But I also check in through text messages and make sure that they understand the processes that I gave them, what they're needing to work through, and if there's any questions. And they do have access to me. They can text me at any point when they have questions, and I'll respond when I'm able to. But I'm very much a hands-on. Like, I want to make sure that they're getting the information that they need and that they're actually taking the steps. Because while it's great that people pay me and I'm like, okay, awesome, I have your money now, I still want you to do the work. I don't want you to waste your own money. Right. So I put myself out there for them they have access to me that entire month of really taking this seriously and learning what they need to do, because I am able to show people a completely different lifestyle within a month. And the changes that people recognize like immediately are so profound that I know a month is a great amount of time to get them to see how they're supposed to be feeling. That way they can continue that journey moving forward.
Well, cool. Now, the big one, trauma. I've just a little bit about me. I've had a meditation practice since 2012. and it really turned my life around right away, which I haven't heard of too many cases of it doing that, and I just committed to it right away. But I don't feel like I've had. Of course, I tell folks, and it seems this way, if we just were born into a human body, right, there's some degree of trauma just from being alive in a human body. But it seems like some people have more trauma than others, like really severe, significant trauma. I mean, just for example, like war times, or very dark abuse of things, okay? And so while we all have some degree of trauma, and comparison's not really helpful either, it's just when I meet with folks with a little bit more significant trauma, I don't know how to put it or talk about it really, that all my spiritual karate moves, they don't seem to really work. It's a whole nother animal in itself. So I want to just throw it over to you to say, what have you learned about trauma, either professionally that you studied, but more importantly in your own life, going into any kind of detail or generalities, however you want to frame it. And we'll just start from there and then see if I have any specific questions.
Yeah, so this is actually my absolute favorite topic, because I was one of those people where I had constant trauma my entire life up until mid-30s. Right. And so it really does come down to, you can experience one big traumatic event, or you can have a lot of little traumatic events that spread out over time, like myself. So I like to let people know the story of when I was a baby and I was in the hospital when I was 1 and 3. When you're that age, and I was tied down in incubators. So I was literally like struggling from the time I walked into this life. Right. And when you're at that age, you don't understand the context of words. You don't actually know the meaning. You take on the feeling of how people are saying them. And so when I'm in these incubators and my parents are afraid that I'm about to die and they're saying, I love you, it comes out in fear, right? They're saying it from a very fearful space. And so I, very early on in life, took on the word love as something terrifying. And so I walked through the world when I was a child fearing love, when I could actually reach the age of saying I love you and understand what they were saying. At the age of 4, I would tighten up and get angry when they would say I love you. And I would never say it back. The most I could muster up was you too. But I still remember the anxiety in my body at that age from the word love, right? And so as time went on, I had my grandma, who was my favorite person in the world. And when I was 8 years old, she was in the hospital. She had been battling breast cancer for so long. And I was with her all the time as a child, watching her fall in front of me, not being able to help her. I still remember just always being in a state of anxiety because I didn't know how to take care of myself, and my caregiver wasn't able to be pretty consistent there. And when she was in the hospital, I wrote her a note, and I was 8 years old. And for the first time in my life, I said, I love you. And I said it at the end of the letter. And 3 seconds later, she took her last breath. Now, as an adult, I'm like, oh, great. I gave her the gift of, she was able to release because she was just so happy. But as an 8-year-old, you have a narcissistic brain that thinks everything is connected to you and you cause everything. So I thought that I killed my grandma by saying I love you. And so in that moment, I shoved that down so much deeper. And it became a thing that I really was afraid of. And then moving on, I told you, I was sick. I was in and out of the hospitals. I grew up with an alcoholic father, very tumultuous family. And my mom died when I was 15 years old. It was 4 days after my 15th birthday. And I still wouldn't say I love you because I thought it was just going to kill her that much quicker. So I walked through this life very much afraid of love and happiness, because the majority, like I said, the majority of my family died before I was 15. And every single time they died, it was a point where they had reached a really profound level of happiness. Like when my uncle got married and had a dream job, and my mom just moved into our new house that we built, and all of these things, they died right after they had this happiness. So I equated love and happiness equals death. And so I continued moving into my teenage years with this idea, never be happy, never love anyone. And so I created relationships that were very tumultuous, reminded me of my past. And then, of course, I was suicidally depressed in my 20s, and it moved into inviting in a partner in my mid 20s who ended up dying of the same cancer that my mom died of. And that for me was the point where I really started turning things around and understanding that I was creating my own reality more than I had ever imagined, right? So that was the point where I really had to look at everything that I had experienced. And those are just little pieces of it, right? That's like just a small piece of what I went through. And I had to look at all of that stuff and realize that if I was going to continue carrying that around, I was going to keep inviting in these same situations and having people die left and right. I'm talking like 20 people before I was even 32. And so it was just like this, okay, like I need to figure something out. And that's where I started really diving into the trauma aspect and healing through that. And the thing that I really love talking about most is I did every single modality that you could imagine. I started yoga, I started meditative practices, I saw therapists, I worked through all of it from a perspective of energy. And I understood all of it. I unpacked it so well. I understood the beauty in all of it. And I can look at it now and actually laugh at some of it. Just like, oh my God, isn't it funny? The things that I created in my life that I invited in because I wasn't letting go of the past, right? But I was still having these upheavals. I was still having that suicidal feeling of, I don't want to be here. I'd have these massive breakdowns of crying. I would have these aggressive outbursts. And of course, I would keep linking it back. Oh, well, I must have not unpacked something from childhood, right? But then I started diving into functional medicine after my last near-death experience, which was about 6 years ago. And that is where things really started transitioning for me, because I started seeing the body as a whole and not attaching it to the experiences that I had, right? Because those already happened in the past. They're done. My soul knows like that was just an experience. You're here on earth. You're going to have a bunch of different things, happen in life. And then I started understanding the gut and how everything that I was putting into my body was affecting my mental health. And I got into a lot of research that a lot of people don't. I had to go deeper than so many people because my body was shutting down to the point where I could only eat 2 foods at one point. And I almost had a heart attack from throwing a Frisbee one time. And so it was just something that I had to go deeper because no matter what kind of practitioner I went to, they weren't able to give me the answers. So I started diving into things and I started learning about plant toxins and how some people can't actually process plant toxins. And there's a specific plant compound called salicylates, and they are neurotoxins. And so if you have any kind of gut dysbiosis, which a lot of people do, they can seep into your bloodstream and cause so many different symptoms. In fact, they're directly correlated to autism, to suicidal depression, eczema, all of these different conditions that we don't hear about, right? We don't think about, oh, I'm eating plants and these things are actually negatively affecting me. And so when I learned about these and I cut them out of my diet, I remember for the first time in my life, sitting and not having these crazy PTSD thoughts running through my mind, being on fight or flight mode. And I remember sitting there being like, is this how I'm supposed to feel on a regular basis? Like, this is my normal. And it was in that moment for me that something just flipped the switch, and it shook me in a way that nothing has in life, because no one was talking about this stuff. No one was mentioning all of these things that you could be destroying your body with if you're not actually able to process these, right? Because of genetic mutations or, certain gut dysbiosis that are causing these. And so that's where I actually started diving into this work on a much deeper level, because that for me was the moment where I went weeks without having any episodes. And then I reintroduced the foods again and was able to turn off and on this response system in my body that I had dealt with for 30 plus years of my life, literally just in a constant state of flight or flight. And I turned it off immediately from one source of food. Right. And so that's where everything just started shifting for me. And I started working with my clients I was in a spiritual counseling role to all of a sudden, hey, we're going to dig deeper. I want to get a gut sample on you. I want to figure out what's going on in your body and genetic mutations and all of these different regulation, our system regulating. And so I did this with my clients, and they found the same thing. Like, people in their 50s who had worked on this stuff for 30 plus years and still had these episodes, whatever you want to call them. And they found the same thing of, oh my God, I didn't know that I could feel this calm. I didn't know that I could feel this at ease in my life and feel like I can take on things and actually go out into public. And so that was really the big aha moment for me, that we tend to look at trauma as an external space, right? And that's where we need to heal it. And that's the only place that we need to heal it. But the reality is yes, trauma does affect our body, but our body also affects the way that we experience the trauma. Because if our body's not able to take care of itself and it's not running the right, neurocircuits, and we're not getting to rewire or to reprogram because we don't actually have the nutrients to do so, or our cells aren't functioning correctly, or our vagus nerve is constantly on fight or flight, we're never going to be able to rewire our programming that is geared towards the trauma in the first place.
Wow, that's incredible. I had no idea that what you discovered. That seems like a very important discovery, and I can't help but wonder what the link is here. I'm just guessing that these foods that you cut out are actually some other people do totally okay with them. So have you found, has there been any link at all why this is?
Yeah, so it all really comes down to methylation issues, right? And so when you have gut dysbiosis and you have leaky gut, that's a big first offender. If you also have genetic mutations such as the MAO gene, which is the monoxamine A gene, if you have a mutation in that, you actually have a really hard time processing certain things, because the plant compounds like oxalates and salicylates, for example, they're actually really toxic to the human body in general. But most people have the liver function to be able to process them enough to where they don't show symptoms until it's too much, right? There is a high level of salicylates that everyone should be avoiding. And to make it clear, aspirin, for example, is come from salicylates, from these plant compounds. And that's why it's so damaging to the gut if you do too much aspirin. And it's no different with the plants. And unfortunately, we're living in a very faddish world where we pick up all these diets and we think, oh, everyone's doing them, so I should too. But it really comes down to remembering that ancestrally, we didn't have all of these different plants that we do today. Most of them are hybrids, right? And so they have a completely different mechanism to prevent themselves from being eaten. And so they have higher salicylates and higher oxalates. And you can cook down oxalates, but you can't cook down salicylates in food. And so when we're absorbing all of these plant compounds that we wouldn't usually absorb, right? Because thanks to importation, we have access to so many different plants that wouldn't actually be in season, and they're definitely not ripe. They're not given the opportunity to ripen as they would in just our natural environment. And so we're eating all of these different compounds, and we're putting it on top of other things like alcohol, and insulin resistance is one of the biggest things. So then our liver's not functioning properly. And while it's trying to take on all these toxins, it can only do so much. And so in general, your liver has to process all of these. And it eventually gets to a point where it says, oh, I can't do these. There's too much. So I have to push these off. And then those recirculate and go into the bloodstream. And then we have constipation, which just perpetuates that push off and going back into the bloodstream. So it starts building up over time. And so when you take that and you compound that with someone who has these genetic mutations, such as the MAO gene or other sulfur intolerances as well, those things are going to inhibit the release of those toxins also. And so just it's building up and it's building up. And so it just becomes a vicious cycle. And that's a lot of reasons why people are having these big difficulties and not even understanding that if they could back off of certain foods, that alone is going to give their body an ability to reset and be able to catch up and take care of these toxins.
I don't want to get too far into the food thing. I'm wondering now, yes, there are a lot of hybrid foods. I wonder, though, with the heirloom foods. I mean, it's hard to get heirloom foods outside of farmers markets. But from what my understanding is, there's quite a bit of diversity in heirloom foods, although they're harder to grow and not as many people grow them. So That's just one thing that came up. And then also, is there a generalized diet that you think would work for most people? Or like, what do you recommend in general for a diet for folks if you can?
Yes, so we do need more protein than we're made on to be told, right? It's a very low level, but the fact is our body is built on protein. And when we don't have enough protein, things can't rebuild as easily. And that's your entire body, it's not just one part. And the other thing is we need to eat lower carb diets. Carbs are directly linked to insulin resistance. And unfortunately, we eat so many carbs, especially here in America. It's the ideal amount of carbs that anyone would want to have is no more than 50 grams of carbs per meal, right? And that's still high. And the reality is a lot of people are eating a Western diet that easily has 150 to 200 grams of carbs per meal. And that is spiking your glucose so much, which then comes to spike your insulin levels. And what I like to remind people is when you're doing this, one, your blood sugars should remain as low as possible. That is where you have the best healing capacities. And when you spike your blood glucose and your insulin spikes, that's where we see a lot of damage start occurring, because insulin resistance doesn't just affect one area of your body, it actually affects every single cell in your body. And 88% of the population has insulin resistance. 50% either has prediabetes or is already diabetic. That's where we're at already in this world. And this is what causes this. This is why we have such an epidemic. And I, who looked thin and healthy at certain points in my life, I was pre-diabetic and I didn't realize. And when I looked at how many carbs I was eating, I couldn't even believe, like it just wasn't even on my radar to think about that. And then when I actually started being able to connect the pieces, I'm no longer pre-diabetic because I eat a keto diet, which doesn't have to be for everyone. I'm not saying there's a one size fits all, but being in ketosis is where our body is actually able to do the best healing, because ketones are what actually, initiate the healing response. And we don't allow ourselves to get into that state often enough. A lot of people just constantly eat throughout the day, never giving their body a rest to, giving it enough time to rest and digest. And so the one thing that I always recommend for people is watch your carb intake. That is where everything is coming down to. No matter what study I do, no matter what disease I pick, it all comes back to insulin resistance.
Well, right on. Very helpful. Thanks. Now, I want to circle back to the spiritual side of this, and I just use that word because there's, I don't know of a better alternative, but one thing that comes up around this is, and maybe this is too personal, and we don't have to go in there, but I couldn't help but wonder your relationship now to love and fear. How has it changed? And I don't know. This strikes me as something that's really, really important in your story and your journey, because and then there's so much in life. It seems like this inversion that normally what most people think of as love has now been flipped up, or had been flipped upside down, or I don't know how distorted, or I don't know how to put it, and I'm not really crazy about this word love either, because I can love ice cream, right? I can love doing something that's not healthy for me. So this word in itself it can be problematic. So I want to put that out there first, and I opt for these really kind of heartfelt qualities and bodily notions of compassion, meaning acknowledging people's pain and caring for it, wanting it to release. and them to know peace, loving kindness, which is this friendliness. And this goes both ways, to myself, others, and it can go to all beings everywhere. I mean, there's no bounds on these sublime abidings. And then there's a joy, being happy for other people's happiness, right? Instead of me being jealous for someone's happiness, I can actually be live vicariously through their happiness and feel happiness for their happiness. And there is no limit. And it's not a scarcity thing. And then this equanimity, this wise balance thing that recognizes that, someone has to live their life. I mean, I wish the best for them and do everything for them, but at the end of the day, they have to make their own decisions. So when I say love, I kind of mean like the good version of it, where there's these noticeable heart qualities that are more specific in what we mean by that. So again, let me just say, so the relationship to love and fear, and what you've learned about these, and how you view these, and if there's an importance to them now.
Yeah, so I think it comes back to, there is only one form of love. There is not a negative form of love, right? If you're genuinely loving, it is love. Right? There are false loves, in which I did spend a good chunk of my life pretending that I loved people, but it was just patterns, right? It was just old wounds showing up in new forms. And that's not love. And not being happy for people who are succeeding, that's not love. And a lot of people can fake that. A lot of people can pretend to be happy for others. But when you actually reach that point, you know it. The feeling is so beautiful in your body. It's like you're experiencing that same thing. You don't have to look at, oh, I want this. You don't have to put any thought into that. It just becomes I'm so happy for them. And when you can reach that point, you've really elevated to a completely different level, because you're no longer seeking external validations of, I need XYZ in order to be happy, right? Because that's what it really comes down to, is I'm jealous because I want that too. When you can become so centered in yourself and know that you have everything you need by being with you, that's all you need to really genuinely love. And what really switched for me was my near-death experiences brought me so much closer to, I don't have fear anymore, right? I can go and do anything that I want to do, and might have the thoughts of like, death is always at my forefront of everything, because I've experienced so much of it in my life, that I'm aware, like, I can do anything in this life and I could potentially die. We're walking on that line every single second of our existence. But that's not fear to me. The fear no longer exists. And I think love is the easiest thing for me now. I genuinely love just my existence, right? And so I don't fear it anymore. Did I continue attracting people who repeated the pattern, even though I understood that? Yes, because that was not a pattern that I had broken yet and understood, like, oh, this is just old patterns and I keep drawing this in. But I got to the point where I've spent 7 years mostly alone because of the self-love that I've, grown into. And I think that's the most important form of love that you need to find in order to offer that anywhere else in the external world. It really does start with you and finding everything within yourself to love in order to be able to offer that to other people in this life. And I think it shifted my life, because I no longer have fear of not having enough. I no longer have fear of not becoming something specific. I had all of these notions of I should be doing this in life and I should be this and have all of these. And it brought me back to this space of, oh my God, no, everything is always perfect and is always working out for me. And that means accepting the duality of life also. And that really did actually bring me more into my empathic connections before were awful. Like, I wanted everyone to heal. I wanted everyone to be better and to do better and to peace for the world. And then when I came back and I saw, I had gotten to see Earth from this completely different perspective, all of a sudden I understood, like, oh, this is a beautiful playground and we have to have the opposition. So everyone is playing such a perfect role for each other and we are mirrors to each other, right? And we are energy. It's not a woo-woo thing. It's a scientific thing that we are energy, and what we emanate is what we get back. So when you're encountering these situations on a regular basis that don't feel good, you need to turn that inwards and figure out, what am I projecting that is inviting this into my life? And that is where we learn to turn things around and to understand that there is such a perfect balance in life, and we're not meant to fix other people. They're supposed to be on their own journey, and they are learning exactly what they need to learn. And that is love. Being able to offer a person their space to have their journey without our input or without our beliefs of what is right for them. That is love. It's not loving to tell another person, well, you should be doing X, Y, Z, just because you think they should be. You don't know what they need to learn. You don't know what their soul came here to do. And that to me just really shifted, that I see love in the most profound ways in this world that a lot of people would never look at as love.
Beautiful. I want to ask you about these. I'm fascinated by near-death experiences too. I don't know if we dropped a little bit there. You talked about coming back to Earth and having a different perspective. But before we do, I just wanted to know if you've heard these perceptions of these thoughts that folks may have about ending their lives and stuff, that it's actually not them a lot of times, that it's actually something they're picking up on from the collective. So if someone picks, especially if someone has these thoughts and they think, wait, well, where is this coming from? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Especially for that type of situation, that what if they're either empathing or picking up on something in the collective thought form. The other thing I heard that I thought was intriguing around this is that the more one chooses to be here, the easier it gets. You know what I mean by that? And then, and then I'll just ask about sharing any details you think you would like to on the near-death experiences.
Yeah, so let me see if I can unpack this. Yes, people can be picking up on other people's energies, and that's something that does happen. Where before my dad died and my appendix ruptured right afterwards, there was a moment where I wanted to jump ship right when he was dying, and I didn't know that he had just died, and I was picking up this, like, I was certain that I was ready to leave this life. And so we can be picking up other people's if we are connected to them in a pretty tight space, right? But more so, I think I found that all of the suicidal feelings went away when I got my body in check. And now I can still make those spike to this day by eating the wrong foods, right? Like if I set myself off, I will definitely, so I can easily go back into that space of, I don't want to be here. And I get overwhelmed to the point where it's that overwhelming sense of despair. And so I see that as a twofold. Yes, it is possible for both. But if someone's experiencing that more regularly, I would say it's an internal thing that they need to work with their body. Versus if it's just like every once in a while they're picking up something and they're in a negative area. And my near-death experience, it was really profound, right? It was the most peace I've ever felt in my entire life. Like before, both times as an adult, before I almost died, the best way that I could describe is the most sense of peace that I could ever feel on this world. Like, I think that's what people seek to find in this life. And the reality is we're not going to find that sense of peace. Like, it is just so light because we're not in a human body. So it's profound and it's beautiful. And I did see Earth from both perspectives. Actually, I got to see it before and after COVID, and I got to see what COVID actually was, and that we needed a massive cleanup. We needed a big reset, and Earth the first time was not looking good. It was dark and dingy, and it was dying. And I remember looking back up at these beings and just saying, does that mean that I have to go back? And they said, yes, you have to go back. This is why you're here. And I was like, okay, great. And so I come back in. And then the second time I got to see Earth, and this was after COVID happened. and it was green. It was greener. It was brighter. It was healing. And they showed me this is why this had to happen. We needed a massive reset. And so people couldn't operate right during that time. And we found all of these wonderful things happening with Earth, like things just starting to regrow within weeks, right, of this big pause that we had to have. And so I got to see it from a completely different perspective. And they gave me a heads up before it actually happened. So I was fine. Like I walked through this world like just with ease during that. I was just like, okay, great. Like spending a lot of time alone. This is perfect. And it was just a really beautiful experience to see it from a perspective that wasn't fearful, right? Because everyone else was living in this deep sense of fear during that time. And I was able to walk through and be like, oh, like this is a much bigger part of the bigger picture. And I got to see the beauty in it. Again, it came back to that perspective of getting to see the beauty in what was happening when it looked so dark from a physical perspective. And so it was just a really beautiful, profound, I mean, there's so much to that, right? I tend to have people bring me back on just to talk about the near-death experience because there's so much to it. But in a nutshell, it made me such a happier person. And when I came back here and talking about actually being here, I was always 1 foot out the door. Like, I mean, from the time I was a baby, right? I was always 1 foot out the door. And it was the last time where I came back and I woke up in the hospital bed, and I was in the hospital for a week. But I was like, oh my God, I came back again and I need to stay here. Like I need to be here and actually do what I came here to do, because I kept trying to escape and it wasn't time for me to escape. And so when I put both feet down, I actually spent the entire year climbing and playing and meeting people and traveling and just enjoying life, learning to actually enjoy being here. And that brought me into a completely different perspective. And now I'm happy to be here. I'm just as excited to go home, but I'm also happy to be here now.
Well, that's so beautiful and lovely, Lynn. I do have one question around that. Did the beings who you met with, did they say who they were or anything like that? And what did they look like? Did you get to see them?
Well, so here's the thing. We're all from different parts of the universe. It's not what people think, right? A lot of us as healers are actually here from other planets who we were put here to really help the world heal. It's not even about helping people heal. It's about helping Earth, because where I'm from is another galaxy, basically, for lack of a better term, we don't use language, but it's a different galaxy, and our planet was actually destroyed much as Earth was in the process of being destroyed. And so we were put here to aid this, right? But a lot of beings here, and this is where the idea of like Pleiadians and Andromedans and all of these other beings comes from, is the fact that we do have different origins. And where I was taken was actually a spaceship, because the colony that I'm from, we tend to be we're more mobile. We go from different places. And so it was just this really profound sense of, oh my God, like here, I'm going to give you two big pieces, because when I was 15 and my mom died, I was driving home with my grandpa, and I look out the window and I see a spaceship. It didn't even faze me that I was seeing a spaceship right in front of me. And this thing comes down eye level to me. I hear my mom say, I'm home and I'm okay. My mom and I have the same origin. And she tells me that, and then it shoots off up to the left, and then it shoots over to the right, and it comes down right back in front of me, and then it just takes off. And I'm 15. I just turned 15 years old. I don't bat an eye. I understand it like nothing. Like it was just like common knowledge to me. And I never thought twice of it. And then when I'm taken into this spaceship, when I have my near-death experience, I was just like, oh, like when I came back, I was like, oh my God, that just made so much sense, right? And then the bigger thing, the second thing that I wanted to mention is there's a movie called Astral City. And there's a guy named Chico Xavier who was the world's first well-known psychic. And this guy looked like an alien. He had such bizarre eyes that he had to wear glasses because people just could not look at him. It's like they forgot to put him in a human body. And so he was one of the first ones that started channeling dead people in public for people. Like he would just walk up to people and be like, your mom's name was Mary, and this is what she's telling me. And so he became really famous really quick. And he actually channeled a being from another planet, and they made a documentary about that. And then they made a movie about it. And this movie's old. It's at least 15, 16 years old at this point. And when I came back a couple years later, I actually ended up watching this movie, and it's the same exact place that they took this guy in the movie. The same, like the same healing light that they were using, the same food that they were eating, the way the beings in the white, they looked human, right? They looked like a more human-like form, but just taller, just like more peaceful. It was like androgynous kind of. And it was the same place that in this movie this guy went to. I mean, it was like identical, the wall structures, everything. And I was just like, oh my God, were they channeling the same place that I'm from? It was just a really bizarre moment to see what I experienced actually happening in the physical that happened to somebody else.
Okay, and so I wonder if these are what some people call as the Nordic aliens, the Nordic-looking beings. That they're humanoid, or there's also there's so many different races and classes. So, well, yeah. Unless you know anything else, Lynn, it's been an honor and a pleasure here. Would you like to tell people how they can get in touch with you? Bring people's attention to any courses or products you may have, how people can work with you, the best way to get in touch with you, basically, and then take everybody out with like a last message. What would you like to leave folks with here then today?
Yeah, so you can find me at www.linnrivers.com, and that's LINN rivers.com. And I actually have all of my services on my website, but more importantly, I'm creating a course right now that is in pre-launch. And during pre-launch, it's only $50 because I want people to have a no excuse price to find out about their health and their body and understand the root cause of all illness. And it ranges from everything from functional medicine to mindset, mentality, and really just runs everyone through what they need to know in order to heal. It's basically me handing them the tools for $50 and saying, take this information and run with it. And so that's my biggest contribution that I'm working on right now. And I also like to leave people with the reminder to invest in yourself. You know, there's so many people who are willing to spend money out there to do all these different things and buy all these different gadgets or spend money on electronics and everything of that nature. But using that money to better yourself is going to be the best investment that you'll ever give yourself. And so really just open up to doing that and taking care of yourself on all levels, mind, body, spirit.
Very cool. Lynn, thank you so much. May all beings everywhere know perfect optimal health, and may all beings everywhere realize awakening and be free.